The stretch of desert highway between Las Vegas and Los Angeles is a ribbon of asphalt winding through the endless, barren expanse. At night, the road becomes an abyss, swallowing everything in its path, leaving only the headlights to pierce the darkness. I had driven this route more times than I could count, but tonight, something felt different. The usual hum of the engine seemed louder, the silence of the desert more oppressive. Maybe it was the fatigue from too many nights in the casinos, too many deals made under the blinding lights of Vegas. Or perhaps it was just my mind playing tricks on me, worn down from the ceaseless grind of business trips. I'd been driving for hours, the glow of Vegas long behind me and the faint lights of Los Angeles still far ahead. The clock on the dashboard read 1:13 a.m., but time seemed irrelevant out here. It was just me and the road and an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb extended in the universal gesture of desperation. A hitchhiker. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, with a shock of dark hair and a worn leather jacket. I hesitated for a moment. Picking up a stranger in the middle of nowhere was the kind of thing you'd see in a horror movie. But something in the way he stood there, shoulders slumped in defeat, stirred a sense of pity in me. I slowed down and pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Where you headed?" I asked as he approached the car. "Los Angeles," he replied, his voice low and tired. "Thanks for stopping." "Not many people do." I nodded, unlocking the passenger door. "Hop in." He slid into the seat beside me, and as we pulled back onto the highway, I noticed a peculiar smell, like old leather and dust, with something metallic beneath it. I couldn't place it, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We drove in silence for a while, the miles slipping away under the tires. The hitchhiker stared out the window, his face illuminated by the passing glow of the occasional roadside reflector. "What's your name?" I finally asked, trying to break the tension. "Jake," he said, turning to look at me. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, and they held a sadness that seemed to reach deep into his soul. I introduced myself, then asked, "What's your story, Jake? Why are you out here hitchhiking in the middle of the night?" He hesitated, as if considering how much to share. "I was trying to get away from something," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From someone." I didn't press further. Everyone's running from something, I thought. Me? I was running from the monotony of my life, from the crushing weight of corporate expectations, from a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a relationship. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked, "You got family in LA?" Jake shook his head. "Not anymore." There was something final in the way he said it, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but an overwhelming sense of unease settled over me. The road stretched on, and I found myself glancing at Jake out of the corner of my eye, trying to figure out what it was about him that set me on edge. After a while, the needle on the gas gauge began to dip toward empty. I pulled into a lonely gas station, its flickering neon sign barely visible against the darkness. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years, but it was the only stop for miles. "I'll just be a minute," I said, stepping out of the car. Jake nodded but said nothing. The gas station attendant was a grizzled old man, his face lined with years of sun and solitude. He didn't say much as he filled the tank, just stared off into the distance like he was looking for something that wasn't there. "How much do I owe you?" I asked as he finished. He glanced at the car, then back at me, a puzzled look crossing his face. "You alone out here?" he asked, his voice raspy from years of cigarette smoke. I frowned. "No, I picked up a hitchhiker a few miles back. He's in the car." The old man's eyes narrowed, and he leaned slightly to peer inside the vehicle. "Son, there's no one in that car but you." My heart skipped a beat. I turned to look, and sure enough, Jake was still sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. I could see him clear as day. "He's right there," I insisted, my voice trembling. The attendant shook his head slowly, his gaze filled with something like pity. "I've heard stories about this highway, seen some strange things over the years, but I ain't never seen no hitchhiker." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I paid the man and quickly got back in the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Jake turned to me, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm, almost detached. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. The attendant, he couldn't see you. Jake sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. That doesn't surprise me. What are you? I blurted out, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, his fingers tracing a pattern on the glass. I'm just a guy trying to get home, he finally said. But I guess home isn't where it used to be. My heart was racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Are you dead? Jake turned to me, and for the first time there was a hint of a smile on his lips. Not dead, just lost. I didn't know what to say. The road stretched out before us, an endless black void, and suddenly it felt like I was driving through something far more sinister than the desert night. Years ago, Jake began, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I was in a car accident on this highway. I was on my way to Los Angeles to see my fiancée. We had plans, dreams, but I never made it. The car crashed and caught fire. I died before the paramedics arrived. He paused, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. But I couldn't let go, he continued. I kept trying to reach her, to tell her I was sorry for not making it, for leaving her alone. But every time I try, I end up back here on this road, waiting for someone to help me finish the journey. The air in the car grew heavy, oppressive. I struggled to breathe, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of the night. Maybe you can help me, Jake said softly, his dark eyes boring into mine. Maybe this time I can finally find peace. I didn't know how to respond. My hands were shaking, my thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and disbelief. I wanted to pull over, to get out of the car and run, but something kept me rooted in my seat. Some part of me felt sorry for him, for the endless loop of pain he seemed trapped in. But another part of me, the rational, terrified part, wanted nothing more than to escape. As we continued down the highway, I could feel the weight of his presence growing stronger, pressing down on me like a physical force. The lights of Los Angeles were still far off, but they seemed to flicker like a mirage. Suddenly the air grew cold and the radio crackled to life, a burst of static followed by an old song, something haunting and slow. Jake's face softened, his eyes growing distant. This was our song, he whispered. She used to sing it to me when we drove at night. It was our thing. I couldn't stand it anymore. Jake, I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know how to help you. I'm just a guy trying to get to a meeting in Los Angeles. I'm not equipped for this. Jake smiled, a sad, resigned expression that made my chest tighten. I know, he said, but thank you for trying. And just like that, he was gone. One moment he was there, and the next, the seat beside me was empty. The air in the car warmed, the oppressive weight lifting as if a window had been opened. The radio went silent, the song fading into the ether. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I stared at the empty passenger seat, trying to process what had just happened. Was it real? Was Jake real? Or was it some bizarre manifestation of my own tired, overworked mind? I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, the vast desert stretching out around me, indifferent to my confusion. Finally, I started the car again and continued down the highway, the lights of Los Angeles growing closer, more solid with each passing mile. But even as I reached the city, the memory of Jake lingered, a ghostly presence in the back of my mind. And every time I drove that stretch of highway again, I found myself glancing at the side of the road, half expecting to see a figure standing there, thumb outstretched, waiting for someone to help him finish his journey.